has a rather a 60s sound to it, and I know that on your 12-inch, Life in a Northern Town, you dedicate that particular song to Nick Drake. How much of an influence does he have on your sound? And
well, it's, first of all, I don't feel that we're 60s retro-aggressive band in a way, perhaps like the Stray Cats were 50s revival in a way. We are trying to be very much of the 80s. It just happens that we grew up in the 60s. And Nick Drake came about through, it was a very odd thing. I always listened to his lyrics. He was a very romantic figure, wrote very, very brilliant lyrics, I thought. And he played folk music, but he also used classical musicians and jazz musicians of the time to augment his sound, which was very interesting, I think, as he was mainly a sort of folk songwriter. And I just felt when I was writing the verses of Life in a Northern Town that one had somehow tapped something. One was on a kind of ley line, a spiritual par with Nick Drake somehow. It just felt, not that we were copying him in any way, just...
What other artists influenced Rosanna, especially being children of the 60s?
Yeah, well, I mean, Gilbert and I are both classically trained, and I feel myself that, you know, I mean, Mozart and sort of Baroque music, also the sort of romantic, impressionist, Ravel, Debussy, Luther Vandross too.
Bob Dylan, love.
Luther Vandross,
great
and
romantic.
Ravel.
I just cry every time I hear him.
Did you ever listen to like the Renaissance and people like that from your
Yes,
country?
yes, but I don't really feel. I mean, do you know, my biggest influence for me with wanting to be involved with using classical musicians as well was Pearls Before Swine, who are a cult band, and also Love Forever Changes, which used orchestras and horn sections alongside the songs for great effect. And I mean, just in the way the Beatles were, really, you know.
And I think, you know, in the 80s, if one can, you know, with all this new state of art, the fantastic technology, if you can learn about that and yet combine it with the sort of real organic instruments, then that's something interesting.
The reason I think we brought up the question in the 60s, I mean, because that's such an easy, you know, in the United States, we like to tack on a label really quickly, but it has a certain progressive sound to it, we found, and that we find that bands even like Prefab Sprout and bands of that nature are starting to sound to us, and as far as with the 60s kind of sound to it. And I understand what you're saying, but basically, do you feel that there's some sort of revival happening in England right now?
I wouldn't say a revival. No. It's like, I'd say that in the punk sort of era, everything went grey as far as music was concerned, and you got everyone just picking up a guitar, which was lovely, but there wasn't much colour in the music, and I feel people are really exploring the variety of sound and vision as well, you know.
And via the new synthesizers, where you can get any classical, any sound that you could get in an orchestra or a sitar or a tabla, anything, you can get the synthesizers to do that. So whereas in the 60s people were experimenting, say from 67 onwards, with using different types of instrumentation, now you can get that at the touch of a button. So technology's brought that within your grasp, and of course it ends up making things sound. The closest point of reference is the 60s for those kind of things. And I think the 60s was an incredibly experimental time, and obviously one wants to but I think Laurie Anderson is very experimental, and I would like to align ourselves with her as much as anyone.
And I think some of the romanticism is coming back. Then it's obviously the reaction against punk again. I mean, it's not a dirty word anymore. One can say you want to make beautiful music and not get sneered at.
Actually, one can actually say they're in love with someone, which wasn't very popular to do about 5 years ago or so, right? You know, how did the three of you meet?
Well, Nick and Gilbert were in a group together called The Act, which in fact was, they were signed to Hannibal Records, a New York label, Joe Boyd, producer of R.E.M., Nick Drake's producer. But after a few years, they felt a bit stultified by always having to work with drums and bass, and they sort of split off and started working with classical musicians, really experimenting more. And I met up with them. They found out I played an esoteric instrument, the oboe, and that I liked the Beatles, so we all got on really well. And we put up our own money to record Life in a Northern Town.
And we actually had this large classical entourage of sort of pool of musicians. We had a timpani player called Benedict Hoffnung, who's on the album, who also plays with the London Symphony Orchestra, and a guy called Adam Peters, who played on cello. And as we tried and struggled to get a deal with every major and every minor independent record label, and they all turned us down, our members got whittled away. Adam Peters was stolen by Echo and the Bunnymen, and then he went to Susie and the Banshees. And June Lawrence, who was a singer now, is in a band called Brilliant, who just got their first record out in England. And by the time we finally got the deal with Warner Brothers, we were slimmed down to... I mean, in fact, Gilbert and I had always been the main, you know, had started the whole thing, but... We were slimmed down and we just had cake.
Now, how did you acquire the talent of course, the brilliant guitarist David Gilmour from Pink Floyd to produce the album?
Well, I'd known him for years. His brother was in my band, The Act. And,
Wait, I didn't know that David had a brother that was
yes,
a musician.
yes, he's got a guitarist brother who he had encouraged me to include in The Act. And then when we split that up, I wrote some lyrics for his last solo album, and we've remained friends. And when Gilbert and I started writing songs together, we wanted to try more experimental things. And Dave is such a brilliant person because he's got his own band. He can sublimate his ego enough to get what we want down. So when we go to him, we say, listen, we want sound effects here. He doesn't go, you're making a comedy record? He says, I remember Dark Side of the Moon, we did that. Okay, yeah, we'll do like this and this. So we worked with him from the beginning. The B-side of Life in a Northern Town, something called Test Tape Number 3, which has whale noises that sound like Ornette Coleman on sax. Yeah. Just whale noises and acoustic guitar and strings. And this, David helped us get what we really wanted.
And we have the benefit of his experience of the 60s, early 70s, as well as modern technology, which is absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, he doesn't have that sort of producer ego that really wants to put his stamp on it. He just sort of brings out the best.
You also have Peter Buck from R.E.M. on guitar.
Yeah, that was great, that was great. I mean, Ben Watt from Everything But the Girl was going to play 12-string on it, and then he couldn't make it, and I went to a party. I was very depressed. I went to a party and I met Peter Buck with Joe Boyd and said, would you be interested in doing it? And he said, I'd love to do it. And he came down, he was so nervous. It was fascinating because he borrowed Dave's 12-string Rickenbacker and he kept coming up to me and going, I'm just so nervous to be here with Dave, which was great. And he was wonderful, of course.
Now, with this kind of diversity, and I can see where, in the future, you're capable of going in any direction because, you mentioned Ornette Coleman, incredible. And we're seeing a lot of jazz come back, maybe because of Sting. I think Sting is kind of introducing jazz to the popular young pop music aficionado in our country who may not be familiar with people like Branford Marsalis and all of those people.
Idol.
Right? So we're starting to see that fusion happening on all sorts of levels, And that gives you an awful lot of leeway in whatever you want to do in the future. However, when you go on stage, now how is this going to transfer on stage? Because let's face it, today everybody wants to see something highly visual, and especially if the music kind of reflects that.
We're going to be like live cinema, hopefully. I mean, the stage show is going to be big slides, projections, maybe dancers, live sculpture. It's just going to be so big.
Very, very Renaissance fair. The ideal thing of it being that you don't have to get up and dance at our gigs if you don't want to. I mean, everyone can do what they like, but that you can sit back in your velvet seats and be entertained. The curtains will part. The Dream Academy will come on.
The popcorn will be supplied.
The popcorn will begin.
And the daffodils.
So actually on stage you would have something like 12 musicians or something?
No, well, maybe five.
About eight.
Five extra apart from us. Yeah.
Our pool of people, it's great. It's going to be a travelling circus.
And our friendly synthesizers as well.
Right, a few jugglers.
And the clowns.
All right, now having said all of this, when can we see Dream Academy tour in the United States?
Beginning of next year.
Yeah. So you can see us on Saturday Night Live. Boom, plug on.
Yes.
On, I think, December the 1st, I think.
You're going to have to do that, right? With all 8 musicians?
First,
yes.
Yeah.
Right.
First time live to 20 million people.
And we'll see Kate on oboe.
That's right.
All right. Thanks so much. We're looking forward to it.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Jay.